Good morning. I welcome you to the service of worship at Lorraine Avenue Mennonite Church, whether you are here in the sanctuary or joining us by Zoom. Today is October 16, 2022. Please join me for the call to worship found on the front of your bulletin. I will read the one, and you will read the all. I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where is my help to come? The Lord will not let your foot be moved, nor will the one who watches over you fall asleep.
My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth.
The Lord watches over you. The Lord is the shade at your right hand. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night.
My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth.
The Lord will watch over your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forevermore. My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. If you are able, I now invite you to stand for our opening hymn. You can find it in the purple hymnal, Voices Together, number 495, 495, Morning Has Broken. Please stand if you're able. You may be seated. We now come to a time of offering. I believe we're still taking offerings in the back. And you can also give online through PayPal if you desire. Yeah, thank you. Please join me in a prayer of thanksgiving. Dear God, we come to you with a spirit of gratitude in the midst of a world that continues to change. We gather here in person and we also gather online. We give here in person and we give online. And in the midst of that change, we appreciate that your presence is unchanging, that you continue to be here, and that what we have comes from you. Accept our offerings and use it for your work. Amen. I now invite you to join me in a hymn. You may remain seated for Voices Together from the Purple Hymnal 682. Voices Together 682. Lord, listen to your children. Him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two maids. He put the maids with their children in front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on ahead of them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near his brother. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. When Esau looked up and saw the women and children, he said, "Who are these with you?" Jacob said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." Then the maids drew near, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down, and finally Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Esau said, "What do you mean by all of this company that I met?" Jacob answered, "To find favor with my Lord." But Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." Jacob said, "No, please. If I find favor with you, then accept my present from my hand. For truly to see your face is like seeing the face of God, since you have received me with such favor. Please accept my gift that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have everything I want." So he urged him, and he took it. Then Esau said, "Let us journey on our way, and I will go alongside you." But Jacob said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are frail, and that the flocks and herds, which are nursing, are a care to me. And if they are overdriven for one day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord pass on ahead of his servant, and I will lead on slowly according to the pace of the cattle that are before me and according to the pace of the children until I come to my Lord in Seir." So Esau said, "Let me leave with you some of the people who are with me." But he said, "Why should my Lord be so kind to me?" So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. But Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built himself a house and made booths for his cattle. Therefore the place is called Succoth. Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, on his way from Paddan Aram, and he camped before the city. And from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought for 100 pieces of money the plot of land on which he had pitched his tent. There he erected an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. We now come.
Good morning. Would you pray with me? God, we have all been Jacob and we have all been Esau. We have been harmed and we have forgiven. Help us to see in this story the themes of reconciliation that you lay out for us. Soften our hearts and firm up our convictions. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing and acceptable to you, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. We are continuing through the book of Genesis, running parallel somewhat to the curriculum that the children are using, and that we'll be picking up in Faith and Issues as well through sermon discussion. The curriculum's called God's Story, God's Song, and the intention is to get through the entirety of the scriptures and see the story from beginning to end. And as I mentioned, I think a few weeks ago, there are a lot of fascinating stories in Genesis, but they don't always preach super well. The text shows us a lot of patriarchs and matriarchs who are in just their fullness very sinful, and sometimes do good things and sometimes do bad things, and sometimes it can be hard to tell what the message, what the lesson is. We heard a few weeks ago about Hagar's treatment under Sarah, and a few months ago I spoke to you about an earlier episode in Jacob's life. So this story is about Jacob and Esau. Jacob saw this vision of a ladder coming from heaven as he fled from Esau, the brother he tricked out of his blessing. So let's review. It's good to get these family trees straight. They get a little confusing. Isaac, that's Abraham's son, married Rebekah, and they had twins, Esau and Jacob. Now Esau was the firstborn, but according to a word from God received by Rebekah during the pregnancy, Jacob was going to be the more powerful brother. And this prophecy came true. Esau is the first to be tricked out of his birthright for a pot of stew. He's very hungry. And Jacob says, I'll give you this stew if you give me your birthright. And Esau says, that seems fair. And eats the stew. that's an oddball story that we could talk about some other day. And so then this has happened, and from what I've read and listened to this week, this second plot that Rebecca and Jacob hatched with the furs and the changed voice and duping blind Isaac, that's sort of like it finishes up that getting of the birthright, because Jacob couldn't really use the birthright unless he also got the blessing from Isaac. That is what seems to be the case, though a lot of this we're kind of doing some cultural guesswork. So Rebecca knows about this, and Jacob is her favorite, and Esau is Isaac's favorite, and Rebecca's like, I'm going to make sure my favorite gets what he wants. So there's a theme. We're going to talk about Joseph next week. There's a theme of favoritism and why it's not great running through Genesis, because it's always ending up with people doing all sorts of strange stuff. So Jacob ends up with the blessing of the firstborn, right? But as a result, he has to run away. Yes, he's got his panda. He has to run away because Esau is really mad. And he goes to Haran and his uncle Laban, which is like a lot further than I realized. If you find a map, it's a long journey. So he lives with Laban for many years and has a whole bunch of wives and a whole bunch of children. And he becomes very rich through some dubious means. He does some weird stuff with animal husbandry and ends up with a lot of goats. And then eventually he is tired of Laban. It's not clear whether that's because Laban's bad or Jacob's bad, or they couldn't be together because their personalities clashed. But Jacob eventually packs up all his people and heads off back toward the land of his parents. So he is chased by Laban, and then there's an eventual reconciliation between the two of them that seems to foreshadow the reconciliation we see in this chapter between Jacob and Esau. And then right in between those two reconciliations is this famous passage in which Jacob wrestles with a mysterious divine figure all night. And that earns him the name Israel, struggles with God and with people. This becomes representative of the whole people of Israel, a nation who struggles with God. This passage and next week's passage, the story of Joseph revealing himself to his brothers, show relatively peaceful resolutions of potentially violent scenarios. Jacob knows that Esau has every reason to still be angry because, as Gretchen pointed out, this was a lot more than a panda. It was everything, the whole inheritance. So Esau could still be very angry. And he hears that Esau has 400 men with him, so he's pretty afraid, and reasonably so. So Jacob pulls out all of the stops in an appeal to Esau. He sends gifts. He orders his family from least to most favorite. Rude. More favoritism. And then in verse 3, we see that he himself went on ahead and bowed to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. So at least he sent his least favorite wives first, but he did go ahead of all of them. So if something bad was going to happen, it was going to be him first. At least there's that. Esau runs to Jacob and embraces him, and that signals the forgiveness. Jacob continues to show deference to Esau throughout this passage. You heard it several times. He calls Esau Lord and says, your servant, my Lord. And he insists that Esau accept those gifts that he sent. Now, Esau then offers to travel with Jacob to where Esau is staying. But Jacob insists that Esau go on ahead because his family will take a long time to get there, which sounds reasonable. But then maybe it's a trick because Jacob doesn't meet Esau in the land of Seir, but instead goes to Sukkot and Shechem. And this final detail is puzzling. Why, if Esau has forgiven Jacob, does Jacob still stay away from him? Is this another trick that Jacob is pulling? Is he trying to claim that land for himself? Does he know that they can't really cohabitate because of the number of people and animals they have? Does Jacob suspect Esau? Now remember that the stories in Genesis, and the stories in many parts of the Bible, operate at least on two levels. They are both stories of messy families and stories that explain the world that the Israelites lived in. Israel and Edom, the descendants of Jacob and Esau, had this fraught relationship throughout history. And these stories about Jacob and Esau endured as an explanation of that relationship. And I think there's a deeper lesson here about relationships and forgiveness. Esau had good reason to be angry, and the text even hints at this with the word in verse 8 translated as kindness. It indicates graciousness beyond what is deserved. Jacob knows that he doesn't really deserve Esau's good graces. Esau does grant this kindness, but it seems to me that that's not enough to bring back together these brothers so that it's just like it always was before. There are moments in our lives when relationships are broken. They may seem irreparable. And sometimes things shift, and we find ourselves able to forgive. Perhaps it is as dramatic as this scene with weeping and kneeling and embracing. Or perhaps it's very simple, just whispered words accompanied by a meal, an offer of a gift. Perhaps it's a note that simply says, "I don't want to be angry anymore." And these are beautiful moments. Forgiveness is a beautiful, powerful thing, and I do believe that we are called to extend it to others. At the same time, forgiveness can be a long time coming. Jacob and Esau remained apart for years, and it doesn't seem to me that Esau forgave him right away and then was just waiting around for him to come back. Even if in their hearts they had extended forgiveness to one another or wanted to reconcile, they were far away from each other. They couldn't meet up for coffee and talk it out. Sometimes forgiveness takes a long time. Forgiveness also doesn't always bring things back to normal. Esau and Jacob reconciled, but they remained apart. Perhaps it was too hard for them to be near each other. Too much had happened. Sometimes forgiveness is simply the end of hostility, rather than a return to the status quo. Sometimes we force ourselves to think that we need to return to the status quo for things to be okay. We can forgive someone and set boundaries regarding their role in our lives. We can forgive and stay away because interactions are painful. We can reconcile without enmeshing ourselves with those who hurt us. Genesis 33 shows some ways forward in tense situations. Jacob and Esau both come to their meeting places tense, but they are willing to reconcile, and that's what makes it possible. They may come with all their people, but they're willing to accept the words of the other. They are deferential to each other, and they show through gifts and through embraces that things are okay. And there are many stories like this in the Bible, crisis averted because of a cool head and a willingness to hear one another. Genesis 33 also shows us that reconciliation doesn't always look the same. At the end of the Joseph story, which I said we'll talk about next week, Joseph's brothers, they come to live with him, albeit it's because of a famine, but they don't say, Joseph doesn't say, you can't live here because you were terrible to me. We'll talk about that next week. Here, reconciliation in this passage, Genesis 33, doesn't lead to one big happy family all sharing and being happy together. It leads to distinct nations living and flourishing for a time, side by side. What would it look like if we allowed reconciliation to look like this? Not a perfect harmony, but distinct melodies, side by side. I believe that God has the power to bring peace to situations that seem impossibly violent. That is a core foundation of what I believe about God. I believe that God can move in our hearts and bring about forgiveness where there was once tension, even where there is bitterness. And I believe that God will remain with us even if our forgiveness does not lead to us being best friends with those who harmed us. In fact, I think that God will remain with us and will remain with those who caused harm. So my question this morning is, can we, like Jacob and Esau, find ways forward in tense situations? Can we find ways to both forgive and to set boundaries? Can we trust God's guidance, God's peace, and God's care for all of us? I hope we can. May it be so. Amen. We will respond with voices together, 144, God give me time. And you may stand. Our sending hymn is The Lord Lift You Up. I can't tell you the number. 832. You may stand. So, my friends, may we go now and go with God, for if we go to Haran, if we go far away, if differences cause us to part, we can know that we cannot go where God is not. And go in love, for love alone endures. Go with purpose, seeking reconciliation, and allowing that to be creative. And my friends, go in peace, for it is the gift of God to the people of God. Thanks be to God. Amen.